This is Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast where we bring Jesus into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Hey guys, welcome to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. Great to have you joining us here on the show today. My email address is jason@sportsspectrum.com, and you can email me any guest ideas or any thoughts you might have on today's show from Phil Murphy, ESPN SportsCenter anchor for ESPN International. You can email me directly, jason@sportsspectrum.com. We are presented today by IJM, the International Justice Mission, helping to protect more than 150 million people from violence around the world. You can join the fight right now to end slavery in our lifetime by visiting ijm.org/tf, ijm.org/tf, and become a Freedom Partner today. We're also presented today by Compassion International, the most trusted child development ministry in the world. And yes, that's what it's about, releasing children from poverty. They do such great work. We love having them as partners and sponsors. And you can get involved right now by checking out the website, compassion.com/teamup, compassion.com/teamup, and join with Compassion and pro athletes and donate to help children who are in poverty. Today on the show, we welcome Phil Murphy. Phil is an anchor with ESPN working on SportsCenter for ESPN International. Now, he's covered 4 Super Bowls, hosted college football, basketball studio shows, reported from countless UFC events, 2 NBA All-Star games, the 2019 World Series. I've seen him at multiple Super Bowls the last few years, been able to catch up with him and say hello. Obviously, a former colleague of mine. Phil joined ESPN 10 years ago. In 2010, went to college at George Mason. This is a conversation with Phil about a few topics. The first being his really interesting journey that brought him through the ranks in a very unusual way to becoming an ESPN anchor. But working for ESPN International means he's heard in places like New Zealand and Australia. I should say seen as well in places like New Zealand, Australia, all these different countries, Africa, just an amazing reach for the work that Phil Murphy does. And he's got an awesome testimony as well of faith to go with it. Now, Phil has also been through it, let's just put it that way, and had those valleys in his life as well the last few years. And he talks about what God taught him during those valleys and how he trusted in God and even grew spiritually in his faith during those very, very dark times. This is a fun conversation. We got to do it in person here in Connecticut. My friend Phil Murphy, former colleague at ESPN, and he's doing great work with SportsCenter and ESPN International. Phil Murphy joins us here today on Sports Spectrum. Take a listen. Phil, welcome to Sports Spectrum, man.
Jason, it's cool. Every time I would run into you at a Super Bowl or different event, we would say, we have to do this, have to figure it out. And all it took was, pandemic and quarantine.
Pandemic, quarantine, and a couple of texts where I finally was like, let's just get this done and let's make sure. Because it gives me a reason to see you, too. And I like hanging out and talking to you and hearing about, before we hit record, we spent, 20 minutes talking about all that's been going on in both of our lives. So it's pretty cool. Let's explain real quick before we start and kind of go back. What your role is now. You work with ESPN International and you're a SportsCenter anchor, but there's, I know, a variety of things that you've gotten to do with your role.
Yeah, anything that is ESPN produced or created that's outside the United States, that is English language, falls into my purview. Because if you think about it, if you turn on a TV here, you're going to see, TNT's got the games tonight, or ESPN has these NBA Finals games, or the World Series, or whatever, NFL games even. International rights are completely different. And there is a massive market for American sport outside the United States, whether it's Australia, New Zealand, whether it's Africa, whether it's Europe, particularly the UK, South Asia, Philippines. So ESPN has a lot of rights deals that varies market to market. And a lot of it comes down to some kind of sometimes square peg and round hole programming. Like if we're going from the NFL game of the week on Sunday to Sunday Night Football from Fox to NBC, ESPN and ESPN, like us bridging that gap is what we do. So I'll host SportsCenters. I'll go to these different events. And sometimes, I mean, if you ever see me at one of these events, I'm handed a microphone and, who am I talking to today? Oh, hey, what's up, Aaron in Philippines? Hey, what's up, Vimbai in Africa? Hey, and so you go through. And so we are the ESPN voice for the English language audience outside the United States, whether that's American expats or that's just Australians who happen to appreciate and follow American sport.
You must hear a lot from people in various areas. Like we were talking earlier about, what countries and what worlds, are seeing Phil Murphy on their television. You said something about even like New Zealand recently. Somebody reached out and said to you, hey, I'm watching you on television. It's like New Zealand is the other side of the world from Connecticut.
Yeah, I was there in February, right before everything went sideways. And we were there for a UFC event. And we were doing a scenic shot of the hotel, and we were staying in beautiful Viaduct Harbor in this gorgeous hotel right there. And we were doing a drone shot of the harbor. And somebody hit me up on Twitter, and they said they were all upset that this drone was outside their window. And I looked outside, and hey, there's Phil Murphy in UFC Fight Camp shooting the show outside. And I was like, because again, I'm not that to me is just different. I was just shooting a show, and you're right. Some kid in Auckland was mad about a drone outside of his hotel room, but the cool thing is it has afforded me to see so many cool places. I love to travel. I've lived all over the place. Lived in Europe a little bit as a kid, so being able to travel now and sometimes take my wife. She wasn't able to come with me to New Zealand, but when we were in Australia together, I was on a work trip, and so my flight, my hotel, my meals are paid for. So for her, if I can just get her a flight, she can have a mini vacation while I work. And we went to Hillsong in Sydney, and that's actually where we got the name of our daughter, was at Hillsong. One of the pastors there referenced his daughter. We love the name, and so that kind of inspired my daughter, Indy.
Well, it's interesting to think about how we all can be representatives of Christ in our roles, in our jobs, right? And, Jesus says, go into the world and make disciples. It's the Great Commission for all of us as followers of Christ. And in many ways, even though you're here in Connecticut, you're going into the world, and you're not making disciples because you're broadcasting a UFC event or reading highlights from an NFL game, but the way you carry yourself, or people that might go, who's this Phil Murphy dude? And they see, oh, wait a minute, he's a follower of Christ. Let me see what that is, what he's all about. And it's a unique way, I think, maybe to be in ministry and to make disciples and preach the gospel around the world through the work that you're doing.
Well, and also you get a global appreciation for the gospel. I mean, this isn't American evangelicalism. It is a global faith, and in different areas of the globe, Christianity is flourishing to different degrees. But I've just through my shows, somebody in the UK recently, a regular on one of my shows reached out and said, oh my gosh, I had no idea you were a believer. And now he and I engage on a completely different level. So even from just like a biblical community standpoint, it's awesome and humbling for me to meet people and then start to hear their story, who are just believers in Christ like me, except instead of an American accent, they have an English accent or an Australian accent. It really makes me feel appropriately small for our God, who is appropriately infinite.
Yeah. Have you perfected the accents yet?
I can do them.
I'm not going to ask you to do them if you don't want to embarrass yourself right
on the
now.
spot. Well, I mean, a lot of it though, my wife will call me out sometimes if I'm doing I do a lot of Aussie radio.
Yeah.
And they'll, little things like the syllabic emphasis, like it's not weekend, it's weekend. So little things like that. So, hey, how you going?
Yeah.
Just call and
mate.
Yeah, mate's a little played out though.
Liam Hendricks called me mate like 5 times in the podcast we did, and I was
Liam's from Perth, right? So
yes.
They joke that Perth is like 10 years behind. So Sydney and Melbourne, maybe they've worn it out. I don't know, but I talked to Andrew Gaze, and he's basically the Michael Jordan of Australian basketball, 7 times league MVP.
Seton Hall, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I remember him.
14 times led that league in scoring.
Wow.
And I do pretty regular hits with him. He's from Melbourne. He never calls me mate. So I don't know if that.
For those listening that don't know who Liam Hendricks is, he's the Oakland A's closer, and he's having a heck of a season this year in 2020. Phil Murphy is our guest on Sports Spectrum. You grew up, you're a military brat, right?
Yeah. I went to 12 schools between kindergarten and my senior year, bouncing mostly mid-Atlantic, Midwest United States, but did spend a couple of years living in Germany. And it was an experience while I was going through it that was very difficult because this is pre-social media. So once I would meet friends and then move away, you'd basically lose touch with them.
Yeah.
And in high school, knowing I was going to go to 3 high schools in 4 years, I mean, I remember I moved to a spot in central Pennsylvania, and it was kind of like my emo phase. I'm like, I'm not even going to make friends. Why bother? I'm only going to be here 9 months.
Yeah.
So there are areas of my childhood where it was like, it was a little bit lonely and rough. But now in hindsight, I've gotten to see a little bit of the world, and I think it's given me an appreciation for when, I get to travel places or interact with places. You kind of know how to carry yourself differently, because when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, I was living in Germany as an American in a German village. And then, we'd take day trips to Italy or Netherlands or Austria or wherever.
That's pretty cool.
It was a great experience. I mean, I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I was the perfect age for it. 12 to 14. My sister was a couple years younger than me, and she didn't really appreciate it. We'd say, oh, we're going to the Czech Republic. We're going to Prague. And I'm like, all right, cool. We're going to Prague. She'd say, but I'm supposed to go to so-and-so's house this weekend. She's having a sleepover. Like, Prague. Sleepover. We need to keep this in perspective. But so I was old enough to appreciate it, but I wasn't quite old enough to get in trouble. And I didn't come to faith till I was 19. So there were some years, 14, 15, 16, where I acted out a fair bit. And so had I been in Germany, where a lot of that stuff is readily available, that could have been problems. So 12 to 14, in God's sovereignty, he says in Acts 17 that he establishes the boundaries of our land. Mm-hmm. He established the boundaries of my land in Europe for those 2 to 3 or 2 years, and it was the perfect time.
Where's broadcasting, sports, media, all of that start to be something that Phil Murphy's interested in?
It wasn't a realistic goal of mine. Like I said, I was kind of lonely as a kid sometimes, but for me, the one constant was sports. I turn on ESPN and the Did You Know, and I thought it was the smartest guy in the world. The end of the show, like Chris Berman's little 30-second hit.
Yeah.
But as I moved from city to city, sports was my one constant. The Broncos had John Elway for much of my childhood, and the Mets always stunk. No matter where I went, the Mets, I could go and I could count on them for 90 losses.
Yeah, I still wonder why you became a Mets fan, but I guess it was passed down from your dad.
Yeah, it was my
right?
dad. My dad's from Jersey, and they won the World Series when he was 9. So, but as I moved from place to place, I move in the summer, so June, July. School wouldn't start till August, September, depending on where I lived. So there was a month or two there before fall sports started, before school started, that I was just kind of hanging out, juggling a soccer ball in my backyard and watching a lot of sports. So that was my passion for sports. And then, when I was younger, I would like reenact some of the plays. I'd see, Jerry Rice catch a touchdown pass, and I'd throw a ball up in my house and try and replicate it. But it became a real opportunity for me in college when I was just looking for ways to, make a couple bucks. And there was a local sports outlet that was covering high school games that allowed me to go and just basically keep box scores, but then they sent a camera to take a post-game photo, and then I started making galleries, and then I changed a little setting on the camera to make video galleries, and then from there, I turned the camera myself, was doing post-game interviews, and I was 19, 20 years old, learning on the fly.
George Mason, right?
I was going to George Mason. I got my degree in business, though, because I still didn't think it was a possible career path for me.
Yeah.
Again, when I was moving around as a kid, Jason, mostly in high school, 8th to 9th grade, 9th to 10th, 10th to 11th. Thankfully, 11th and 12th were the same school. But I'd go and I'd sit down, and part of the in-processing was, okay, let's talk, here's the map of the school, and it was all the same, but different places. And they'd say, okay, so what are your passions? What do you want to do when you grow up? And I'd say, I don't know. I like sports. I'd like to, I know I had the self-awareness at that time to know I was not a superior athlete.
Yeah.
But I was like, I just want to work in sports. I don't care if I'm front office or the business side of things. Like, I knew what the options were, but the guidance counselors would look back at me like I was a little kid saying, I want to be president or I want to be an astronaut. Like, well, that's nice, but what do you really want to do? What are you good at?
Yeah.
I was like, math. So I got pushed down the business path, and I mean, thankfully I know how to do my tax return now, I guess, but my degrees are in accounting and marketing. But I mean, for my junior year, when I interned up here at ESPN, I knew that I was going to ride this out as long as I could. And I'm 33 and I'm still, getting to play in the sandbox for a living.
So I want to tell the story about how you got the job at ESPN and the internship and all that in a second, but your faith, because I know this all kind of intersects based upon when you and I have had conversations in the past on when you really started to understand who Christ was, starting to follow him. It was in your late teens, around that college time, right?
Yeah. And I'm not here to, to bang on any particular group, but I grew up in a Catholic church. For me, though, it was just the rote every week, check the box. My parents bringing me along
same
with
here.
them. And,
Yep.
you know, and to their credit, like there are a lot of like pragmatic, practical takeaways I had from that, but my faith wasn't my own. And I was just kind of going through the motions. And then once I started to get to a point where I could start to figure out how to circumvent a lot of the rules, well, if I just confess this sin, then it doesn't really matter what I did last night. And then, you know, I came to kind of a crisis of faith though, where, you know, I was in a relationship in college, and heartbreaking breakup. And I started to really examine, like, what is it that I'm doing Sunday mornings? I kind of just took a whole survey of my life, right? Like, what am I doing career-wise? What am I doing relationally? What am I doing spiritually? And I started to look at, like, the church and say, okay, if I'm going to do this, because I was still going through freshman and sophomore year of college, still going to the Catholic Church on campus at George Mason University. They have a fine ministry there, a lot of great people in it. But for me, I needed to examine, is this legit? And so I opened my Bible. I didn't really open the catechism. I knew enough of what Catholic Church protocol was. And I started to say, okay, what do I think about, you know, the Eucharist? What their thoughts on that? What's in the Bible? And then how does that strike me? And then maybe some other resources. And I started to pare down a lot of the service to the point where I was going literally for the homily, the little 5-minute go get 'em speech from a priest, you know, about a third of the way through the service. So I could time it. I could rock up. It was like an 11 a.m. service. I could rock up at like 11:17 and be out of there by 11:30 and just sit in the back, get my little bit of wisdom. Like, cool. And then I don't really jive with the theology here of transubstantiation, so I'm going to bounce. And I remember thinking, like, okay, God, clearly I'm to the point where I think you're real, but I think you're calling me to more than 13 minutes a week. And so that's when I started to really examine, okay, what's out there and what's legit. And it was funny. A girl who she left her boyfriend at the time to start dating me in college. He was becoming a pastor in Tennessee. So timestamp this. I sent him a MySpace message. And I said, hey, I know you hate me, but you seem like a good resource. Do you know any good churches in DC?
Wow.
And God bless the guy. He sent me 2 great churches, one of which I went to my first Sunday. And I remember they preached out of James 3. I was like, my gosh, this whole thing is basically the homily. This is amazing. You know, about the tongue being the pastor's illustration was that, it's more of a thermostat than a thermometer, and how it can steer the ship. And I was like, yeah, if I go back and listen to the sermon, it's probably not gonna blow my mind, but then it did, because it was just like expository teaching. First time I'd experienced that. So I went to that church and then checked out the other one he sent me. He sent me 2, and that became my home church in DC, McLean Bible Church. And that was for the next 3.5 years while I lived there. I went to that church, went on a mission trip with them to Tanzania, gotten some great Bible studies, met some people that are still friends to this day. So that was really where things started to kick off for me. And then it just became this appreciation for the word. I am not a voracious reader, but when I was opening the text, I mean, it was the Spirit leading me straight to, like, all right, Romans sounds cool. I like Gladiator, so I'll read about Romans. And I was like, I was walking along the Roman road, but not even realizing it. Right. So that's when I was really starting to see, like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And there's so much richness to this text.
So going from there, you end up getting, because I didn't know that you had an internship. I knew that you got to ESPN. I didn't know the internship story. So how are you entering at ESPN when you have this business accounting degree thing going? What happened there? Tell us how it happened.
I applied to every internship under the sun. I mean, I think however many they posted in summer 2007, I applied to every one, even the ones where straight up wasn't qualified. Yeah. It was like, you know, do you know different IT, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, nope, but you can decide that. And so I got a call back for the stats and information group, then called the data group. Yes. Which is, you know, bottom line stats. If you see any smart number on ESPN, it's from these guys. And I became the George Washington of their interns. I was their first ever intern. And I did that for 12 weeks, summer of 2007. Internship went well. 2 years on, I'd graduated from school. They sent me an opportunity to apply for a job. And then with that, when I came up, you know, there were a couple of other job openings that I'd heard about, and the recruiter there kind of heard what I was doing and what I wanted to do. And they said, you know what, I'm going to introduce you to a couple other, you know, heads of groups here. So my one interview turned into 9. This is summer 2009. Okay. And then one of those became the first job offer I got at ESPN. Offered December 2009, and then I started in January.
What was the title, the official title that you had that first job? Do you remember?
I think it was multimedia editor
Okay.
for ESPN Rise. May it rest in peace.
Let's tell everybody about ESPN Rise. That's actually how you and I met, because at that time I was a talent booker. And if anybody reads my new book, The Uniform of Leadership, they'll read about how I was setting up interviews at the ESPN car wash and bringing guests in. And with these car washes, guests would come through and we would put a whole schedule together of different interviews on radio and television and digital and chats and ESPN Rise with Phil Murphy. You were like 23, like, I'm going to be here interviewing. I'm sure you could think of some of the people that you interviewed.
Drew Brees, Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
Like, guys for me, at the time, there's A-list. And it was so funny because Jason, you would send out a car wash email. It's like, all right, Drew Brees is going to go to the 7 a.m. SportsCenter, and then he's going to go to Mike and Mike, and then he's going to First Take, and then Phil Murphy. And then I was like, where did
Why
this?
am I
and
in
then
this
SVP
email?
radio, like, one of these things is not like the other.
Yeah.
But the reason I was doing it, I wasn't shoehorning my way in there as much as I was.
No, of course.
Our website was designed for high school athletes.
Yeah.
So ESPN has and had college football. They had recruiting. But recruiting wasn't so much for the athlete. It was for college fans who wanted to know, is this kid going to Penn State?
Yeah.
Or wherever. What we were at ESPN Rise was a utilitarian site that allowed for the more standard run-of-the-mill average high school athlete to benefit from content. So if we have Drew Brees and Nick Foles, I remember that one. So what are Friday night lights like? How do you deal with pressure as a high school athlete?
Mm-hmm.
How did you deal with pressure? What do you wish you knew? And these athletes just loved doing these interviews because it was something different. It wasn't your standard, hey, Drew, how's the shoulder? It was him drawing back on, his glory days and loving that time. So that's what we were at ESPN Rise. And then that got absorbed into recruiting, and then that kind of went away because while it was useful content, it's, from a business standpoint, it's just difficult to monetize that. But I stuck around and then I moved to recruiting and then college sports and then ultimately international.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Walk us through the sort of progression of your time at ESPN, because you're an on-air talent now as a SportsCenter anchor, international anchor. But during those days, and I knew you were doing some on-camera stuff for Rise, but your technical title, as you said, was like multimedia editor or digital media producer or whatever. And you were trying to work your way up the ladder. And a lot of people at ESPN who become on-air talent, very few of them take the route that you took to become an on-air talent. They usually go to Paducah, Kentucky, and then they work their way up maybe a little bit, Gainesville, Florida, up to like
Black Eagle, Montana.
Exactly. Some of these amazing, awesome small markets, to then eventually get an agent and then get seen and possibly have an opportunity at ESPN. That didn't happen for you.
No, I put the cart before the horse, I guess. For me, I was applying to those roles. And again, in any career field, like, we get in there, you're motivated, talented, and whatever your endeavor is, you want things to progress. You want things to go well. You want to get greater opportunities, greater income, all of those different things. So for me, it was no different. I was moving along at ESPN, but I was moving more horizontally as things reorganized. And, I'm looking at, okay, what can I do to progress my career? I knew I had the passion for on-air. And when I got pulled into ESPN Rise, we were what's called an affinity site. You'd go to ESPN.com and you'd click us and it would take you to like a completely different website.
Yes.
Different content management system. So even the aesthetic was different. But that allowed us to have some latitude and you to wear a couple hats. So I would do the Drew Brees interview and then edit the Brees interview and then go do a voiceover for, Austin Rivers and against Anthony Davis in high school playing against each other at this national event.
Yeah.
So it was a multimedia editor in that sense of, like, in a local TV market, you'd have like an MMJ, a multimedia journalist. But once we got brought into the big boy fold, that didn't really exist anymore. And my job needs turned to where they didn't need me to be on air because we had freaking Carrie Chow and Cassidy Hubbarth and Michelle Steele and Prim Siripipat, like pros who were available to do the voiceovers.
Yeah.
So here I am, and they're like, you're okay. They're good. We're going to let them do the voiceovers. You cut the video. So I said, I want to get good. I want to do this. I was applying everywhere. But still, when they would send me to an event, and I remember 2012, I was at the Elite 11 quarterback camp, and Johnny Manziel was there.
Yeah.
And this is right when something hit the fan for Johnny. But he saw me interviewing the kids and stuff, and because that was my job. And then I said, you know what? Let me just ask. So I said, hey, Johnny, no, you're not here to do media, but I would love for 5 minutes of your time. And he was gracious and he was cool. And he was like, yep, answer my questions. I asked some tough questions in there and he was perfect with it. Professional. Great. And so then I sent it back and it got a little bit of a blow up here. Like SVP ran it and College Football Live ran it and a couple shows. Yeah. And it was me doing the interview. So a guy at ESPNU at the time, reached out and said, hey, love your work in general, but I thought this was particularly good. If we were to send you an opportunity to do, I don't know, 5 minutes a week on ESPNU's Recruiting Nation, would you be interested? 1,000% yes.
Yeah.
So I did that, and then that became like the feature of my reel. And then I started doing some stuff at College Football Media Days with coaches where I kind of carved out my own niche. We had great college football reporters, Mark Schlabach, Chris Lowe, Jake Trotter, all these guys around. And then, I did this like little like quick hitter thing with coaches. I called it the pick six. Mm-hmm. And it was just like 6 quick questions. Boom. But it was on my reel. And so I tried to work in the college football space there. Again, I was doing that, but 97% of my job opportunity and my job responsibility was behind the camera.
Yeah.
I would work the full college football season, 65 hour work week. But then I remember it was Tuesdays. I would stay from 6 p.m. to 1 a.m. To do my Recruiting Nation thing, which I wrote, I cut, I edited, I voiced, and then I cut down and shipped out. The only thing I didn't do was hit record in the control room. So I had to go that extra mile to get that opportunity, but for me, it was worth it. And then the head of ESPN International, a guy who's still my boss now, Sean Riley.
Yeah, I love Sean.
Came up to me at the gym and said, hey, I'm Sean Riley. Love your work. And I was like, I don't know.
See, that's a good accent.
Sean Riley.
That's a Sean Riley accent.
His is easy to do. If you tell him he has an American twang, he gets upset, which I do all the time. But he came and he saw me at the gym and he said, hey, I think you're good at what you do. I don't have anything for you now, but I'll let you know. And it took more than 3 years, but he let me know. And it was my dream job. And that's what I'm doing now. What I'm doing now, honestly, like, bro, I don't need a SportsCenter with my initials on it. Yeah. I don't know if I should say that on camera, but I am. Yeah. Like what I do, I love doing, and I want to provide for my family, which I'm able to. Yeah. And go to work every day, and it doesn't feel like work, and that's where I'm at. Yeah. So that to me, it was worth all the hustle and grind and extra hours. And if you told me 20 years from now I'm still doing this, dude, I'm big smile on my face. Yeah. Because that means that my daughter won't have to pay for college. I'll pay off my house. And I'll love doing what I do every day and get to see cool parts of the world while I do it.
Did you always think initially, whether it was the internship or when you first got that multimedia editor job, that you wanted to be on air doing what you are doing now? Or did that evolve as you saw sort of the role, the jobs, meeting the different people at ESPN, thinking maybe this is where I want to pivot to?
I knew I wanted to be on air because I liked storytelling and I liked the creative latitude that permits. And there were a couple talent evaluators along the way, both internally at ESPN and externally, who would look at my tape and said, hey, we think you have some good parts, but you might be better suited for like a bureau reporter.
Sure.
Great. Cool. It's different. I'm not at a desk, but like I didn't have this vision in mind. Yeah. I just knew that I enjoyed storytelling. I love highlight reading. So that was one thing I wanted to do that if I were a bureau reporter, say, I wouldn't have had the opportunity. Yeah. But, for me, there was no like picture in mind of like, oh, the job has to look like this or it has to be this show. I just like enjoying what I do. And I really enjoy what I do when I'm at the tip of the proverbial spear in terms of the storytelling. And that's what my role now, I think my title is like reporter, host, anchor or something. It doesn't fit on a business card.
Right.
But they do it that way because I may be asked to wear a couple different hats. I've been a field reporter for us. I've been a studio host. I've been an anchor. I've done live shots and all those different things. And that's cool. I can mix it up. And you get this neat opportunity. But the crazy thing is, Jason, I heard no so many times throughout the process as I was applying to different jobs all over the United States, even a couple international.
Yeah.
And this job that I have now is better than any of those. And it didn't exist. And what I tell people a lot of times who get discouraged, especially those who have a faith background in whatever their career endeavor is that we see God in Genesis create in two ways, looking at the old Hebrew. He creates asa and he creates bara. One of those, I think it's asa, is he creates out of what is there. So if you have, this table, right, you could, wherever you get it from, let's say IKEA, and it would come with all the things. And Jason made a table because he had all the parts. He created asa. He created out of what was there. Bara is creating ex nihilo. God creates the heavens and the earth. And God can create out of nothing. So as I was saying, like, hey, I was yielding this over and over to him. Like, hey, am I barking up the right tree? I'm spending a lot of extra hours on this. I got more important things in my life going on, but where do you want me for my career? You tell me, I think it's Psalm 90:17, you establish the work of my hands. Yes, establish the work of my hands. Okay, God, establish the work of my hands. What do you want me to do? My passion is here. I keep getting these little inklings that I'm barking up the right tree, but where's it going? And he was creating something out of what wasn't there that I think was providentially suited for me and my passions. And now, I can, however I'm meant to utilize this platform, both professionally, personally, and spiritually, now that's what I should be doing. So it gave me a lot of faith. That's what faith is, right? Like, it's looking, fear is looking into the future and fearing God's absence. Faith is looking into the future and assuming his presence. So as I sat there, I stole that from Mark Driscoll. It's a good line. And as I looked into the future and I assumed his presence professionally, he created bara, and what that should do is make my faith more unshakable. What it does, it's a sip of water that I take and I feel thirsty again. I have to keep reminding myself that he provides, but he does. And so that's part of my professional testimony, is that he provided something that was honestly better than literally hundreds of jobs that told me no.
Yeah. Quick break to tell you about our sponsors today. IJM, the International Justice Mission, believing every person deserves to be safe and free from violence. And I want to take a moment to tell you about the great work that IJM is doing. And what many people don't realize right now is that violence is a threat to so many around the world who are poor. It's as much a part of daily life as hunger, disease, or homelessness. And it's often overlooked, but not by IJM. They believe, and we believe, that every person deserves to be safe and free from violence. And by partnering with local authorities to rescue victims of violence, bring criminals to justice, restore survivors, and strengthen justice systems, IJM is helping to protect more than 150 million people from violence across the world. But they cannot do this alone. They need your help. This is such important work that cannot be done without the help of people like Freedom Partners, some of IJM's most loyal partners in the work of justice, and their support of $24 or more each month helps survivors of slavery and violence from the moment they're rescued until they're fully restored. You can join the fight right now and become a Freedom Partner with IJM by going to the website ijm.org/TF. ijm.org/TF to become a Freedom Partner today. We're also presented today by Compassion International, the most trusted child development ministry in the world. And you can team up right now with professional athletes and Compassion International to fill the stadium. And what that means is 70,000 children have been left without a sponsor because of COVID-19. That is the capacity of an average NFL stadium. So we want to help fill the stadium with a year of needed funding for these critical next 12 months. So you can donate right now to help these children and release them from poverty. You can go to the website, compassion.com/teamup, compassion.com/teamup, and donate and help release a child from poverty today. Phil Murphy's our guest here today on Sports Spectrum, ESPN, SportsCenter anchor with ESPN International. So you talk about your professional testimony and kind of the plan that God had for you all along, but there's a lot of stuff that you were going through personally too. And I just, whatever comfort you are willing to share, I want you to walk through a little bit of the Job lifestyle that you were going through in your life at the same time professionally that you're going through it, waiting, hearing those no's and trying to figure out professionally, what direction, God, do you want me to take, as you just described wonderfully, but you're also going through it personally too.
Yeah. And again, I look at this, and I've told you this before, Philippians 1:12, these things have happened to me for the sake of the advancement of the gospel. And what I want to do with a painful season in my life is be open and honest with it in the hopes that it advances the gospel somehow. And if that is somebody who might be going through it, to say God can redeem any circumstance, that's what his all-powerful nature is, or that, hey, you're not alone, there's nothing wrong with you for if these things happen to you, then I want to share that, even if it gets a little awkward for me to talk about. But yeah, as this was going, so timeline for my professional career, it's 2020 now. This all started in 2010, but it really heated up from like 2012 to 2017. Well, 2012, I got married. 2014, I discovered rampant infidelity in that marriage. Tried to work through it for 8-9 months. Listen, I wasn't perfect, but I was faithful.
Yeah.
And again and again and again, I was finding out the infidelity wasn't going away.
Mm.
And I was empathetic toward it, sympathetic toward it, but it came to a point when it was just, she was gone and not coming back. Had moved out of the house. I'd moved out because I wanted to give her space. And then I went back to the house and, the scene where you open the fridge and all the food is spoiled, like that was my life. I was like, man, she hasn't been here in weeks. She's living with somebody else now. So that's when I made the decision to say, hey, if you're not going to file to terminate this, then I will. And divorce in the Christian community is such a scarlet letter sometimes.
Yeah.
And that was something that I had to get over those next couple of years. And part of that is because a couple of years after that, when I started feeling comfortable dating again, I dated somebody and, pretty early on, she made it clear that she wasn't very comfortable with that fact about me. I don't hold that against her though, right? Because like when she's probably 4 or 5 years old dreaming of walking down the aisle, she's not dreaming of doing it for a guy who's doing it for the second time.
Sure.
So I had to have grace. If I'm saying, hey, I'm expecting you to show grace, I need to show grace to people in that circumstance as well. So I was open with my story. And, this does get better. I'm happily married now. I am beyond blessed with my wife and my daughter. She has shown me more grace than I can communicate. That season though, 2014, 2015, where, man, I was just low. And to see that my faith wasn't conditional upon my circumstances, for me was very reassuring. That God was never more real and apparent to me and almost like tangible to me as he was in that season. I got more out of my time in the Word was more fruitful. Funny enough, I saw him as more faithful because I started examining my own sin too and realizing that, man, my sin is so much more prevalent than I want to think. Like, if I had an issue with pornography when I was, whatever age, and now I've gotten past it, like that's fantastic. But there were still like urges there, right? And there were still different things in me and motivations that I knew were, nefarious, that needed to work through. I needed further sanctifying. So in that season, I was able to focus not so much a couple $2 words. People talk about sanctification, right? Being set apart and progressing in our faith and growing in our faith. The $2 words there are vivification and mortification. Vivification, seeing God more clearly, and mortification, getting my life to better align with what the Bible would urge us and command us to do. So often we're just, I'm a very pragmatic guy. I would focus so much on the mortification, like, how do I get over this? And then what are the 5 ways to, and that's great. But this allowed me to do the vivification part. I was able to, I could say, man, things of this world, some of them just stink. And we live in a fallen world, man. Matt Chandler even says the very air that we breathe should be a little bit toxic to the soul, like in just the world we live in. So I was able to, in that very real thing, look at Christ and say, man, now I have a greater appreciation for what perfection is. I have a greater appreciation too for the depths of sin, very rebellion against you, yet your grace to adopt all of us as your children. Reconciliation is so much more mind-blowing than I think. So I had that realization when I was, in a position where I was just basically left by my wife. So, man, you want to talk about like a divine voice. Like that's not coming from me. Like I'm not thinking of, wow, I'm so cherished by God in that season, unless it's coming from the voice of that God himself.
Yeah. So
being able to share that, and I did have a number of times where friends of mine who weren't believers were coming up to me like, hey man, you seem like you're doing pretty well. Are you? And I could say like, honestly, no, this sucks. But like, here's how I'm processing this. And it gave me so much more credibility with people who either didn't believe or were curious about believing, in that I was still believing these things earnestly despite my circumstances. And I said, man, this is raw and this is real. So for me, so much growth happened in that season that it enabled me over time to get to a place where I could, and again, with everything going else from my life professionally, all these extra hours and like trying to hustle and grind and do all this, but those things kind of work together where I could look at, okay, God, you are provider God, and you are all present, all holy. I don't get this, but your omnipotence is greater than my incompetence. So I can move forward and trust you and say, listen, I don't need the end goal. Just give me the steps. What do I need to do this week and today? And work out of it in that way by his carrying, his prompting, that, as things started to turn. I met my wife in I can't remember. I'm starting to meld together. It was about 15 months after my divorce. I met my wife. We took it, we dated long distance for a little over a year. Came here, we dated short distance for, like 9 months or so. So we're talking like year and a half ish. And then we got engaged and married. And man, she's phenomenal. She was so gracious to understand as I was struggling with being fully open with her about here are struggles I'm having, because I'm like, things are going well. I don't want you to judge me if I'm still struggling with this stuff.
Yeah.
But she was very gracious with me. And then I ultimately was able to get some biblical counseling that was supremely helpful.
Well, that's what I want to ask you, Phil, because I think a lot of people listening have been through it or are going through it. And I mean personally going through it, like professionally, athletic-wise, pandemic and things like that. There's a lot, sports being taken away from a lot of high school kids, whatever, coaches, but going through it personally, where a lot of people don't talk about the personal struggles that people go through. So I want to just ask you, as you went through that, and you were just about to say it, so I'm sorry if I interrupted you there, but what are some of the things, the tangible things that really helped you?
Yeah.
Obviously getting in God's word and seeking him, but the people that you maybe confided in, the counseling, as you were about to say, things like that.
Well, I mean, and you getting into God's word is great, but also knowing the motivation for that. I can sit here and I can rattle. I have a good memory, right? Like sports stats, whatever. I mean, it's one of my strengths that helps me professionally.
Same.
But with the word, I would find, okay, I can memorize some scripture and I could flex a little bit at a Bible study. But I would find too, sometimes I would almost keep people at a distance, because if I would just kind of like reference a text that's like on the periphery of what we're talking about, but I just know the address just so I look smart, I could kind of keep people at an arm's length. And I found that in seasons before that, and being honest, in seasons since, I've gone to scripture to know the word of God, but not so much to know the God of the word.
Right.
So I found myself, it was like a very pharisaical approach that I was taking at times. So for me to go to the word and really try and understand the God of the word. So I remember there was one night, it was like a Friday. I know it was a Friday, where I was living with some roommates. This is like 2016. My wife and I were dating at that point, but we were long distance. So Friday night's free. They wanted to go out and nothing crazy. Just go watch a game somewhere, right? Yeah. But I just had this stay in. And at the time I was going through a psalm a day. And something just told me stay in, read your Bible, which, listen, again, I'm not a voracious reader. That's normally not me. I've had a hard time, candidly, in the pandemic, reshaping my schedule and finding a good rhythm where I'm not the way my rhythm was listening to podcasts on my commute, Bible study once a week, using my Bible study prep time as my quiet time in the Word.
Sure.
That was good. I don't have any of that now. I'm not driving into work. I'm working from home. I don't have Bible studies in person. So I'm really trying to figure out how do I get in that steady, healthy rhythm. But in that season, I was able to do I was doing a psalm a day, and I came up to Psalm 71. And Psalm 71 is all about, in you, O Lord, do I take refuge. And I'm going to memorize this, not because I need to have this to flex on, but I need it etched into my soul. Mm-hmm. And just God's prompting there to get into the word and to know his heart and pray through individual words of scripture. In you. Okay, I'm talking to him. I have a personal relationship with him.
Yeah.
Oh Lord, you are all-knowing, all-powerful, all-present. Do I take refuge? Man, whether the arrows are coming down on me or I just need some warmth, I come to you. So really going through the scripture slowly was very helpful in that season. But I don't want to miss the point of the question, which is the biblical counseling element, to where, all these things I'm saying were true for me and well and good, but to have somebody who was emotionally removed from the situation, who had seen similar situations before, no situation is exact.
Sure.
But again, we live in a fallen world where bad stuff happens, and it happens to people regardless of economic status or race or gender or age. Like, but to have somebody who knows God's word be able to speak into me and with authority say, hey, I know you're thinking this and feeling this. Here's what truth is. So you marinate on that, and God will fill in the gap, and just have somebody very pointedly and directly point me toward, what was truth was supremely helpful. And I still have a note on my phone from those truths that every now and again I draw back on, not because like, oh, I'm still sad about my divorce necessarily, but if I'm just like, man, Tim Peterson, one time he and I were talking and he said X, Y, or Z. So I'm going to go back. Oh yeah. John 14:6. And so it's like, then I can go in and reference it. And I'd never been a note taker when I would like read my Bible, just kind of like read it again. Oh, it's, and I just go through it and kind of memorize it or whatever. Since then, because I remember this one biblical counselor, I mentioned Tim, it felt like I was drinking like a fire hydrant's worth of wisdom at once. Like I wanted a sip of water and I was just like, I need to soak this all in.
Yeah.
So I started relying on that. And man, that was just so helpful. I'd advocate that for anybody. Friends, plural, since who I know who have been through maybe not the exact same circumstance, but even just like relationship difficulty or struggles with a certain sin or whatever. Like I am so much more reflexive to point them toward biblical counseling because it's so helpful. And it's part of, it's just God's grace that he has, his ambassadors here, like we're called to be ambassadors for Christ. That's not always for people who don't know him. That's sometimes for people who know him well, but circumstances have clouded that vision. So the ambassador can come in and say, hey, this is truth, and speak with authority to that, and have also the professional training that they need, just the common grace of psychology and sociology to know how we as humans are biologically wired, and they can speak to us in certain ways. So that for me was so helpful getting through that season.
Without sharing any names, Phil, can you share a time, if it's happened, maybe it hasn't happened, I get this question a lot too, when you were at ESPN and someone was curious and all of a sudden an opportunity came because they wanted to know about this faith that you talk about, this follower of Christ, this guy who goes to church. Because I know you found other people at ESPN who you're close with, and you and I were kind of like that were followers of Christ. We went to our every other week, fellowship group, and we had 25 of us from ESPN that would get together and pray and read some scripture and kind of share some things that we were going through. But I'm talking about the people who aren't Christians or curious. You've mentioned a few of that, of the traits that someone might have, where you were able to kind of tell them about what you've went through, tell them who Christ is. And obviously, I used to tell people all the time, listen, we are not paid to be pastors at ESPN, or wherever you are. You are paid to be a ESPN SportsCenter anchor for ESPN International. However, you are also a Christian first who happens to be a dad, a Christian first who happens to be a husband, a Christian first who happens to be an ESPN International anchor. So carrying that faith with you, was there an opportunity or a story that comes to mind where you were able to share and kind of live that faith out and see, oh, I see why you have me here at ESPN right now, God?
Yeah. For me, what made those conversations easiest was at first having an established baseline that is who you are.
Yes. That
you identify in Christ, and however it is that you would do it, right? I always kept the Bible on my desk, not so I could browbeat people with it, but I always want to have a Bible to give away. I've only done it a few times, and I've only done it with people with whom I have an established relationship, right? Like I'm not walking down the halls of Building 4 and being like, you look like you could use some spiritual wisdom.
But you get fired for that, right?
but again, I had it at my desk, along with other books, and I've had people ask about it. I said, yeah, I'm a Christian. I keep this Bible here is for me in case I don't, I want to look something up quickly, or I give it away as a gift if somebody ever wants one.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's how I always phrase it. I give it away if somebody wants it. And also, on social media, I try and be very forward that I'm a follower of Christ, and I list that first.
Yep.
Follower of Christ, and then whatever else I do. Husband, father, profession, puppy daddy, whatever it is, follower of Christ first. Put that right there. And again, it becomes like, the lowest hanging fruit for the Twitter trolls of like, you think Conor McGregor's going to win the fight this weekend. What do you know about truth when you believe about the Sky Fairy? Like, okay.
Yeah.
And it's just like, whatever. So like, but put it out there about your faith in Christ, organically, then live it out. You can't be in such a way that you have to be above reproach if you're going to be forward in that. So those are all things that I would do so that my friends and people who I care about on a friend level would know that I'm a follower of Christ. And I've had people say things before where like, hey, we have a sponsorship coming up and it's it's an alcoholic beverage or something. Are you comfortable doing that? I saw you tweet a Bible verse the other day. And I've had people say that. I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine doing that. Like, I have no qualms about alcohol. I respect if friends of mine decide to abstain, but like personally, and I don't say all this.
Right.
And I say like, yeah, no problem. I appreciate you asking me, but I have no problem with it. Same thing. Again, we work in the sports space. So it's like, hey, there's a betting website. Are you okay reading a voiceover for that?
Mm-hmm.
But to me, all that says is like, okay, they know I'm a believer.
Yeah. There's fruit.
And they have seen me carry that label and do so well enough to where they ask like, hey, does this contradict what you're passionate about or what, your theology or your religion, as they say. I hate that word, but you know what I mean? So baseline established more than a few times. People if you're close with friends and they're going to go through it, man, people's parents are going to pass away. People's kids are going to get sick. People are, anytime the economy gets bad, people get laid off.
Yeah.
So for me to go and you have these conversations where somebody's just like down, like, dude, I don't know if they're going to find me another role here. I don't know what I'm going to do. The things that have just helped me, I'd be like, hey, if it's awkward, tell me that. You have permission to tell me to shut up, but can I pray for you?
Yeah.
And it's like, if there's a couple like, hey, tell you what, tell me how I can pray for you. And I had somebody say, like, listen, man, he's like, this is bad, but there's so many other things going on in the world. Like, don't worry about it. And that gives me the opportunity to say, hey, the God I'm praying to is infinite.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, where I'm coming from, he cares about your tears and your hardships. And yes, there are bad things going on all over the world. You're not at the back of the queue. And it doesn't mean it's more example. Like, he can redeem any circumstance. And he'll hear if I pray for you. So I'm like, and I'm not just like beating somebody over the head with it. Not even giving them chapter and verse. But just showing like, I care about you. And because I care about you, I'm taking your concerns to somebody else who cares about you.
Yeah.
And that has, even just in a, earthly relationship sense, that's deep in that relationship. I've seen because people say like, man, this guy cares about me. And to them, I don't say them as like non-believers, like painting a broad brush, but the people to whom I have said that, they have seen like, man, like there might be let me just give this a shot. And that's all I want to say. Just give it a shot. And anybody who's out there who's thinking like, this is kind of BS. I don't know if I buy this. Like, I would say just close your eyes and ask God if he's real and ask him to reveal himself to you. And not do so in a way like, make something fall from heaven.
Right.
But like, listen, if you're real, I think C.S. Lewis said, if Christianity is true, it is of utmost importance.
Yes.
If it is untrue, it is of no importance. What it cannot be is of moderate importance.
Right.
It cannot be of moderate.
There's no middle ground.
There's none.
Yeah.
So that's what I would urge people to do if they're in that thing, and that's what I want to draw people toward. Because listen, in my gifting, evangelism is so far down.
Yeah.
But what I don't want to do is dismiss that. I had a pastor one time give me an illustration. In fact, he was the guy with whom I went on a mission trip to Tanzania. He was a pastor of our church at McLean Bible Church, guy Todd Phillips. He had this illustration where he said the first time when he and his wife were married, the first weekend where she went away, and he had the house to himself, like bachelor pad, back again, going to put on the Cowboys game. He's a big Cowboys fan. He said...
In D.C.?
Yeah, but he's from Texas.
There
so
you
he's
go.
Relocated.
Wow.
So you want to talk about being an ambassador in a foreign country. Cowboys fan in D.C.
Yeah.
So he said the first thing he was going to do was just make himself some cookies and binge and watch the Cowboys game. And he goes through and he finds on a website the cookie recipe.
Yeah.
He goes through. He's got all the ingredients, right? Except the one thing he didn't have. And I'm not a baker, so I'm not going to list the ingredients. But I know he had all the ingredients except for eggs. He's like, no eggs. And he's looking. It's like 10 o'clock. He's like, man, I can't go out there. There's no grocery store open. Where am I going to get eggs? He's like, we'll be fine. So he tried to make the cookie. He made the cookies, just didn't include the eggs. And so his wife called him, I think it was the next morning. She said, "Hey, Todd, how'd everything go, last night?" "Oh, it was great. I watched the Cowboys game, made myself some cookies, but we tried to blow past it." She's like, "Well, you made cookies?" She's like, "How'd that go?" He's like, "It's fine. We didn't have all the ingredients, but, I kind of threw it together without the eggs." And she's like, "You what?" He's like, she's like, you can't do that. He's like, "Well, I tried." And she's just like laughing in hysterics, Mom. He hears her take the phone away. It's like, "Mom, you will not believe what he did." And she's like, "Honey, you tried to make the cookies without eggs. You said they were terrible. Like, why did you even try to do that?" And he goes, "Well, it's just one ingredient."
Right.
And her response is, "It's a very important ingredient." The illustration being that in our walk, we're called to get in the Word, we're called to pray, we're called to, make disciples and share the gospel.
Sure.
If you want to omit just one ingredient because it's not your strength or because you're in low supply, the end product isn't going to be what you intend. And so
that's good.
That for me was something where, again, evangelism isn't my strength, but just my interest of people who I care about and love, friends who aren't believers. For me, just asking somebody how I can pray for them oftentimes is the best way to show that there is a God who cares and his people care about them too.
Yeah. I heard it from Derwin Gray. I don't know if you know Derwin or follow him on social media. He's a pastor out in Charlotte, and he's been on this podcast a few times, and Sports Spectrum. And I heard him on an interview with Annie Downs on a podcast recently, and he simply said it's got to be demonstration before explanation. And I thought, and it's evangelism in its way, but it's just about, as you build relationships with people, especially if you work in a place that's not ministry or Christian, I should say, like a church or a nonprofit or like a Sports Spectrum, that you have to demonstrate who you are as a follower of Christ before you can start explaining anyone who Christ is. And they have to see Jesus in you and build that relationship with you before they can say, "Okay, now I'm ready to hear it and receive it."
Yeah.
Because that was how it was for me for 3 years, watching my brother live that out and then saying, "Okay, now I'm ready to receive, Chris, whatever you have, because I'm interested in it," Chris being my brother. And I feel like that's so important, and I carried that over. It took me a while to get that, but I felt like I tried to carry that over at ESPN. Like, I'm not going to beat people over the head with the Bible either, but let me demonstrate it in the way that I'm living. And then if there's questions or if people want to say, why, what's the Bible about, kind of like what you said, then you can explain it to them and you can tell them and you can show them, but it has to start with demonstration.
Yeah, I mean, there still needs to be a proactive approach to it.
Sure.
I mean, that's what we're called to as believers. Like,
our time on this earth is short.
Right.
No doubt.
So like, this isn't hey, let's talk around the awkward conversations.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, I mean, this illustration I got, actually, I took some of our youth ministry kids a couple of years ago to this like outdoor water park in Portland, Connecticut. Brown Quarry or something. And anyway, there's this cliff jumping thing there where you jump off like a 20-foot cliff and a 30-foot cliff into water.
Nice.
And what I would tell them is, guys, you need 2 seconds of courage, and then gravity will take over. So with things with sharing the gospel, you really just need that 2 seconds of courage.
Yeah.
You need to walk up to somebody who you know is hurting, who, again, people with whom I have established relationship. I'm not going up to strangers and be like, "Can I pray for you?"
Right.
Again, if that's your gifting, fine, but I couldn't do that and have it not be awkward. But if there is somebody with whom I have the established relationship who is on my heart, I can go to them and say, "Hey, man, tough circumstance. I get it. We've talked about it. We've kind of been downtrodden. Can I pray for you?" And then getting into why I want to pray for them, what my heart is behind that, and honestly, who's given me that heart to that, and that is the Creator God. That's
good. As we wind down, Phil Murphy, this has been great, and I really appreciate you coming by the house as we tape this in the studio, the home studio here in Connecticut. 2020, just some thoughts on what this 2020 has taught you, what God has maybe shown you or taught you as you walk through this. A lot of your work was being relegated to you being at home. It's funny you mentioned you were at spring training when the pandemic hit, covering Major League Baseball spring training, and then everything shuts down. And then everything happened, between racial unrest, between the pandemic and quarantining. We're just a day or two away from an election, a giant election about
Oh, is that
to
coming
happen.
up?
Yeah, a presidential election that everybody and their mom are going to be talking about. So 2020 has brought everything we could ever imagine, or maybe even not imagine, to a year. But what's the Lord shown you? What's been on your heart this year for you personally?
Man, well, I mean, reflexively, just looking back at 2020, it's just been defined by so much hardship.
Yeah.
And that to me is just evidence that we do live in a fallen world. that things just here are not as they're intended to be, both with interpersonal sin, interracial sin.
Yeah.
I mean, heck, weather, even like the earth groans, right, for his return.
Yeah.
Political divide, as you said, very timely for that one. But maybe it's because we've been talking about it so much that asking this question in the wake of that, I go back to just his consistent provision, and that there's nothing in this world that he's not able to redeem for his glory and the good of those around us and around him. It has been such a difficult year, but for me, I welcomed the daughter into the world, and that's just been so incredible.
2020 looks a lot different when you look at it that way,
and
right?
Honestly, Jason, you look at it, my schedule, what it was supposed to be. What my schedule was supposed to be. She was due May 10th. C-section scheduled for May 5th. She rocks like a couple of days early, May 3rd. Cool. Well, my schedule was supposed to be May 31st. For the next week, I was going to be in Perth, Australia for a UFC event. I was going to fly straight from Perth to London for the London Series 2.0 Cubs and Cardinals. I was going to come back here for like a week or two, then go out to ESPY's Major League All-Star game, and then go straight to Tokyo for 4 weeks of Olympic Games.
Yeah.
Sounds great for a sports guy, right? Except when you have a 3-week-old daughter or 4-week-old daughter, and that you're not going to see her again until she's 18 weeks old, except for like 1 week in the middle. Man, that's a different perspective. And my wife and I talked about it. I was going to do it. It was just too many good opportunities, professional opportunities for me to pass up. So I'd work my paternity leave around that and just FaceTime her to death. Good in theory. Having spent those 18 weeks with her, dude, I couldn't fathom being away from her for that long.
Mm-hmm.
Both my wife and my daughter. But especially my daughter, because of how she just changes so much week to week and how she recognizes me. I keep going back. I'm like haunted by the thought of, what if she didn't recognize me the same way as she does now? And she lights up every time I come into the room. So this isn't like me being team pandemic. This is objectively very bad thing that I thought was going to like really compromise my career. But there was just a different blessing in it. And that's all this extra time with my family that I wasn't supposed to have. Even working from home. I don't have a 40-minute commute each way to work like I normally do. I have 13 steps down to my basement for my home studio. And listen, I know there are some people who just aren't nearly as blessed in that they, may have lost jobs or career took a significant hit. But I will say that, like, in my experience, whether short, medium, or long term, that all these things happen for the sake of the advancement of the gospel. And if you're in him and you pursue him, that he will show you his job. God's job is not to show us his sovereign will, but if we carry out his moral will, what we know he calls us to, then his sovereign will be accomplished in us, and we'll see it. So that's been my focus, is like, listen, circumstances aside, obey him, pursue him, love him, listen to him, and you'll find peace and you'll find blessing both in this life and the next.
He is Phil Murphy, ESPN SportsCenter anchor, ESPN International, and a great friend. Thank you, brother. This is awesome.
Thanks, Jason. Great chatting to you.
And many thanks to Phil Murphy for joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. That was a fun conversation, and I'm glad Phil was able to make it in person and come over to the home studio here in Connecticut to record our interview. You can give him a follow on Twitter at Phil_sports, or just search Phil Murphy, Phil_sports. And he's a great dude. He really is, and very thoughtful, and just been a great encouragement for me over the years. I've known him now for 10 years, and so glad that we were able to connect, and just appreciate him for being here today on Sports Spectrum. We also appreciate our sponsors today, IJM, the International Justice Mission. Check them out at ijm.org/TF, ijm.org/TF to become a Freedom Partner. And of course, our partners, Compassion International, we thank them as well. You can check them out at compassion.com/teamup, compassion.com/teamup, and join the fight with pro athletes and compassion for children in poverty. Our website is sportspectrum.com. That's a great place for you to go check out all of our content here at the Ministry of Sports Spectrum, with daily devotionals, different stories and articles written each day. And then every single podcast is available over at the website, sportspectrum.com. And lastly, whatever app that you're listening to this podcast on, if you do us a favor, click that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast. And we got tons of interviews out there, 500 plus conversations with people in the world of sports intersecting with faith in Christ. Check it out over at Sports Spectrum and subscribe today. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time right here on Sports Spectrum. Love you guys. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Please do stay safe.